let's start. So welcome to our last webinar. Today, Julien Rameau and I will be presenting. Just for you, Christian. So yeah, the outline of the webinar today is to do first a recap of the coronagraphic modes with James Webb. Also, we'll go through the coronagraphy target visibility tool, the CTVT. Julien will be talking about observing strategies and doing an astronomer proposal tool demo at the end. So, recap of high contrast imaging with James Webb. There are 3 instruments that offer this coronagraphy mode: MIRI, NIRCam, and NIRISS. MIRI has 4 masks. Each is tuned to a particular wavelength, 10, 11, 15, and 23 microns. So if your science requires one of those wavelengths, that's good for you. If not, well, too bad. NIRCam has 5 coronagraphic masks that can be used with about roughly 20 filters between 1.8 and 5 microns. And NIRISS has the aperture masking interferometry mode, the AMI mode, and it uses a NRM, non-redundant mask. And it operates at 4 wavelengths. Okay, so most of you probably already know that the strength of James Webb in high contrast imaging is not necessarily the inner working angle. It doesn't necessarily reach very far into the inner angles, but it has a large field of view, 20 by 20 arc minutes. So that can be an asset when, for example, dealing with large debris disks or disks around stars. Also, James Webb has access to wavelengths longer than 5 microns. That's very good. And offers low background at those wavelengths. So those are its 3 strengths. Okay, in terms of the performance and the expected contrast achieved with those modes, today we will not go through detailing the performance, simply because it's a difficult game and it requires lots of details, and there's at least one parameter, the wavefront, which is somewhat unknown, and there's strong dependence of performance on wavefront. The wavefront is good. What's unknown is how it varies with time. It's expected to change on time scales of days, or it was expected to change on that time scale. And rephasing of all the mirrors was to occur every 2 weeks. It is going to occur every 2 weeks. But the latest Otis test on the ground showed that there was a much smaller time scale wavefront variations. And this was worrisome, but changes were made. So in principle, we should be back where we expect, but who knows? We'll need the commissioning to tell us, how the wavefront varies with time. Okay, so for many reasons, the James Webb ETC, the exposure time calculator, is perhaps not the best tool at the moment to estimate the contrasts. However, if it's good at one thing, it's to check for saturation. So you should always use it to check for saturation. Pangaea coronagraphy is actually a better tool developed by experts, and there are links provided at the end of this webinar. The observing strategy calls for, it's recommended to have a roll on your target, plus the observation of a reference star close in time to the science observation. And yeah, that's it. So let's start with one of the 3 instruments description, MIRI. MIRI has 4 quadrant phase masks, actually 3 phase masks and 1 LEO mask. The LEO mask is for longer wavelengths at 23 microns. It has a larger obscuration. The 3 quarter phase masks, what did I say, quadrant phase masks, are actually devices that induce a pi shift in the wavefront to do destructive interference of the primary of the central target. So you get attenuations of several hundreds with this, if you position the star just at the center of the device. Okay, and along the 4 edges between each quadrants, the quality or the performance is not as good. So you want to shoot in the 4 quadrants, but not on the edges. And also, there's a LEO mask in the pupil to limit speckles, and so that yields a throughput of about 60%.
Loïc, can we ask question?
Everybody but you. No,
okay.
Seriously, yes, you can.
Has anyone tried subtracting these images? One, let's say, take the 10.75 minus 11.4 to see how much SDI would work with James Webb?
No, Julien says no.
Well, so there is only one paper on the expected strategy and performances that was made by Anthony Boccaletti. It was only using PSF subtraction within the same filter.
Okay, because if we look at the images, they look quite similar. So I'm wondering if switching filter would be faster than rolling or changing target.
Well, actually, you can't switch between the filters because you have to position. You have to do a new target hack.
Okay.
Because you will observe through a different phase masks.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I should stress the images on the left are of the 4 masks and with simulated PSFs here. There are, those 4 filters available. Okay, for NIRCam, which is the machine for high contrast imaging, you have 5 masks, 3 round masks of pre-designed size, and 2 bar masks. So the round masks are designed so that they are optimal for 6 lambda over D, so at various wavelengths. And it goes between, you see the wavelengths. The mask 2010 is between 1.9 and 2.1 and is on the blue channel imager. And the 2 other round masks are for the red channel imager. And then the bar masks actually are a bit smaller. And the advantage is that you can tailor the position on the occulter according to the wavelength that you're interested in. And so there's a blue channel set of filters with the 1 mask and a red filters with the other bar mask. There's a lot of information on this slide. You see the inner working angles, 0.40 arc seconds, 0.64. Those are the occulting, the inner working angles, 50% transmission of the mask. You also see squares, the big black squares. Those are the target acquisition positions. I'll talk more about that a bit later. And at the bottom, you see that each configuration or mask has a set of filters that you can use with. And the field of view, again, is of the order of 20 arc seconds. And all masks are coupled with a LEO mask in the pupil plane, which strongly limits the throughput to 19%, roughly here. Finally, there's NIRISS, which uses a mask. It's not a coronagraphic mask, but it's a mask. It's the non-redundant mask, has 7 holes, and which in the pupil plane, which produces interferograms in the image plane. And you can play tricks of interferometry to recover information down to 0.5 lambda over D. But bear in mind that the final product is basically a model check of the scene that you're looking. It's not a clearer image. It's just you build a model and compare with the observed scene. So it works for simple scenes preferentially. NIRISS AMI also needs a calibrator star to calibrate the wavefront, and has obviously a lower throughput of 15%. And there are some possible alternatives to use the same interferometric technique, but with actually a clear pupil, and that's called the kernel phase imaging. I will not talk more about this. So to recap, here's a table of the inner working angles for the various modes of James Webb. Again, the definition of the IWA is the radial distance, the radial angle at which the transmission drops to below 50%. And, you know, on the right hand side, you have the last column tells you the inner working angle. NIRISS has, you know, basically 0.1-ish. And NIRCam about 0.3, and MIRI is a bit higher because obviously longer wavelengths. That means, you know, yeah. So I'm looking in my notes to see if I would have forgotten something. No, I don't think so. Okay. Oh, well, a question about NIRCam here. You know, why would you use the bar mask rather than a round mask, or vice versa? Actually, the bar mask is good because you can choose the exact wavelength, the exact occulting size that you need for that wavelength, so that's better. But obviously, if your companion or scene falls along the bar, then you're doomed, and you need to use the round mask. That's pretty much it.
Louis?
Yeah.
Can you go back this one slide before? One after. For MIRI, you have a LEO coronagraph that specifies a 23 micron wavelength. So why do you attach a wavelength for a LEO?
Because you need that's set. You cannot change filter. The design was made for that wavelength. You have no option to use a different filter for that.
Okay, I'll go read about that because I'm quite curious why it's wavelength specific.
I honestly, I don't remember exactly why they need to stick to that, but I believe it has to do with you know, attenuating optimally at the summit.
Okay, so they have an apodizer.
Yeah.
So it's an apodized LEO. It's not a LEO.
They have two things. They have a LEO in the pupil plane and in the image plane.
Okay. I'll go read about it. Thanks.
Yep. All right. So I asked Julien to have these comparative contrast curves. Basically, I wanted to let people know how does James Webb perform with respect to existing facilities, and we have here rough curves it's not necessarily comparing apples to apples, but roughly as a guide. And you can see that GPI and Sphere reach to very high contrasts past 0.1 arc seconds. NIRCam is going to be very good at going to large separation with strong contrast. NIRISS AMI is going to be able to have small contrast but go inside at inner working angles. And MIRI, of course, goes a large field of view and yeah. All right, so target acquisition is important because that defines basically how precisely you position the target on the occulter. For NIRCam, it's going to be basically first putting the star in one of the squares at the bottom. So if you can you see my arrow? Yeah. Okay. So if your star is very bright, you're going to position it here. And that's a neutral density filter actually here by a factor of 1,000, so you won't saturate. And once you've centered the star, you're going to move it on the occulter. Okay, if the star is not as bright, you can use the small subarray here, which has no neutral density filter. And the trick here is that James Webb is very precise when doing small angle maneuvers. And this is the case here by having the E-array, the subarray close to the occulter. That's what you get precision of roughly, I think it's something like 5 milliarc second of pointing precision when you do that. There's an option that I think most people will use to actually take a big snapshot using all of the detectors of your scene when you're on the target acquisition spot and when you're in the occulting spot, so that you can do a better reference, astrometry reference. Target acquisition for MIRI is even more, it's a two-step process. It has the option to use a neutral density filter so you can observe stars as bright as Vega. The first step, you position the star in a large subarray here, then move it to the second smaller subarray, and then it's a very small angle maneuver to put it right in the center of the occulter. One thing that they suggest of doing is to split your science observation in two, and in between there's going to be a second target acquisition. So you'll first do target acquisition with one quadrant here, and then the second set of observation is going to be using TA on the 180 degrees opposite quadrant. This way, if there's a persistence, it won't be confused with a faint source. Finally, target acquisition for NIRISS. NIRISS, it's simple. You basically have your subarray here of 80 by 80 pixels. You do a target acquisition on this 64 by 64 pixel subarray here, and then move the target inside. There's no critical positioning of the PSF to be done, except perhaps for calibration. If you want, always, if you're staring and always want to use reference stars, you want to always land on the same part of the pixel. Okay. The detector readout modes and subarray modes are available for high contrast imaging. Readout mode for NIRCam, all readout modes are allowed. NIRCam has like 8-10 different readout modes, but obviously for bright target, the rapid and bright and shallow modes are preferentially going to be used. For MIRI, there's only one mode. It's the fast mode. That means that all the reads up the ramp are kept. Same thing for NIRISS. NIRISS Rapid, all reads are kept. The subarray for science observations, NIRCam, you could use full frame if you want, or 640 by 640 for the blue channel, and 320 for the red channel, which both yields the same 20 by 20 arcsecond field of view. For MIRI, it's subarrays, and they are basically 24 by 24 arcseconds field of view. And the NIRISS, you can also use full frame if you want, or the standard 80 by 80 subarray. All right. Maybe, I don't know if I went too fast. If there are any questions, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to demonstrate the coronagraphy target visibility tool. That's a standalone tool. And first, I wanted to remind you that James Webb can do rolls to do ADI, for example, but it has a limited range of rolls it can do. It's plus or minus 5 degrees. So basically, you have a baseline of 10 degrees, roughly, that you can do. And so coming back to the CTVT, here's information how to install it, download it and install it. It's a Python-based tool, and I'm gonna demonstrate it for you here. I'm well prepared, so everything's typed. I use Astroconda, and this year. Okay. So you first obviously enter a coordinate or a target. We'll use GJ758. That's right, Julien? Okay. And we've got the coordinates. We're going to put a companion to it at 215 position angle in about 1 arcseconds in separation. And we're interested in using MIRI with the 11 micron filter. Okay, so I'll just update the plot here. So you get two plots, two figures. The one on the left is simply the observability of the target, and it's the same as what the general target visibility tool gives you, same as what the APT gives you basically, except that you also have the solar elongation here. So basically 90 degrees when you point directly away from the sun. And obviously James Webb has to stay not too far from 90 degrees. So that defines a set of visibility periods in blue. In blue is the position angle of the target as a function of the day of the year, when you can observe the target. Okay, on the right hand side, there's the, sorry, Julien, you have a question? Oh, the width, good point. The width of this blue trace comes from the ability to roll the spacecraft. So if I were to zoom here, okay, you see that you have an ability to roll by about 10 degrees, just what I was saying before with the previous slide. So within a single day, you can roll by 10. So that means that if you're interested at a certain position angle, there's a range of date when you can achieve those position angle. The plot on the right is actually the image you get behind the coronagraph and the position of the companion with respect to the instrument. So in red is the large field of view, 20 by 20. In blue are the edges of the 4-quadrant phase masks. You obviously have the target in the center. The companion is in red. The TA1 and 1 to 4 are the target acquisition spots. You proceed from this position to the inner spot and then to the center. So if we zoom on the central region here, okay, so here you have the position of your companion as a function basically of day of the year. So if I click on one, don't tell me it won't work. I'm on my laptop. Usually when you click here, then you have a point that the corresponding point that appears here on the left. I swear it worked earlier. Maybe, I don't know. Well,
click on the left one.
I'll check. Oh well. Let me try again. Let me quit and try again. Live demos. There, okay. So you can see here that, for example, you have basically three windows to observe the target. You have this window that starts here, this 100th day, that ends roughly at the
So everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I talk about the, oops, we don't need that actually. Sorry, just a few, let me. So I will talk about the observing strategy that is necessary for the coronagraphic or the AMI observations. All right, that should be, all right. So basically when you want to design your observation with James Webb for a high contrast purpose, you have to go through basically 6 steps. So choosing the instrument, the observing strategy, designing the observations with the ETC, choosing your reference star, then use the CTVT to estimate the visibility period and the orients to find the best position angle for your observation, and then you go finally to the APT. So if I go into the details, so the first step, basically, your choice of instrument features and masks should be mostly driven by the science you're interested in, but they also mostly depend on the contrast and the separation of your object of interest. If you're interested for a very close-in companion that is accessible with the AMI, that's the option that you want to use. If you're interested in a very large separation with a moderate contrast, maybe you can go with MIRI and so on. So you have to assess the different performances on your object to assess whether this is doable or not. Once you have decided which instrument, filter, and mask combination you'll use, you will have to go through the PSF subtraction strategy. So as Rick said, basically the recommended default strategy is to observe your target at 2 position angles, so basically 2 rows, to do angular differential imaging, and then to observe a reference PSF in a non-interruptible sequence, so all observation back to back, so that you'll be able to do a reference differential imaging. So the advantage of doing a roll was proved with the HST, so it was very efficient to mitigate the detector artifacts and to reduce that noise at a given reference state of the observatory. But using reference differential imaging, so by observing a PSF, it was also shown to be very efficient with the HST as part of the ALICE program. So it will prevent from a self-subtraction of your science target. It will mitigate some artifact as well. So because the behavior of the observatory is not really known, this is the recommended strategy is basically do both ADI and RDI. So by adopting this strategy with NIRCam and MIRI, a sequence will look like this. So you first observe your target, then you roll the observatory by, say, 10 degrees, you re-observe your target, then you slew to your PSF reference, and you re-observe at a single position angle your target, your PSF reference star. For the nearest AMI observation, basically you don't need to roll the observatory unless you're interested to expand the exploration of the baseline, so basically the UV plane. But if you don't want to do that, the only thing you need to do is to observe the target, move to your PSF reference star, and then re-observe it under the same mode. So basically, by adopting this strategy, you will mitigate the PSF degradation by the reference drift, the star color difference of your PSF and your target, self-subtraction biases, as I said, but also the imperfect target acquisition and the jitter of the observatory during a single sequence. There are also several options. So with the NIRISS AMI mode, it's not recommended to jitter during the observation, but unless you should stare on the same pixel to minimize the flat field error, basically. For NIRCam and MIRI, there is an option called a small grid jitters. So it will be done on the PSF reference star only. So basically, this option will try to compensate for the for the errors on the target acquisition and the jitters. So the strategy here is to do an observation on a 3rd pixel grids by 5 or 9 points. So this way you build a mini library of PSF reference star, and then by combining those PSF with principal components analysis, you should be able to reconstruct an optimized PSF to be subtracted to your target star. So from simulation, it has been shown that adopting this strategy will improve the contrast by a factor of 3 to 5 for NIRCam observation and up to 10 for MIRI, but only below 1 arcsecond, as you can see here. Beyond that limit, the improvement is much less pronounced. But because you will do a small grid jitters with many points, this strategy will be very expensive in terms of overheads. So unless you have a specific science case or you are interested in an object very close in, you don't want to go with this strategy. All right, also different options. So say you're interested to observe a given target with different features. So you can adopt two strategies. The best one should be to observe your target, then to do the roll, then to go to the PSF reference star using the same filters and the same mask, so that you minimize the time between the different observations. So you minimize the wavefront drift. But if you do so, and then you repeat that sequence by changing the filters. So you do roll 1 or 2 PSF with the first filter, and then you change the filter, and then you go back again, roll 1, 2 PSF. So by doing so, it will cost a lot in terms of overheads. So the other strategy, which is the default one, it's called the optimal efficiency. So instead, you stare on your target, you observe through all filters, all the masks, and then you move to the second roll, you repeat the observation through all filters, mask, and then so on the PSF. So as you can see on the right plot, the overheads between the optimal efficiency and the optimal wavefront are extremely different. And because it is not known before flight what would be the wavefront drift of the observatory, it is not recommended to use the optimal wavefront option because your wavefront might be very stable, maybe not, who knows. But if you want to go with the optimal wavefront in your proposal, it will have to be extremely well justified. All right, so just here an example of a standard default sequence. So you salute your target, you observe with MIRI in the 3 different filters and masks. Then you roll the observatory, you repeat this sequence with the same 3 filters. And then you move to the target, to the PSF reference star, and then you repeat the observation through the different filters. So that is the recommended strategy, which is called the optimal efficiency. All right. Once you're done, you can go with the exposure time calculator. So as Loic said, the current version of the ATC is quite limited for high contrast imaging, but still it has to be used for target acquisition to derive the settings to obtain the recommended signal-to-noise ratio, which is about, say, 300 for NIRISS, ME mode, and higher than 30 for NIRCam and MIRI. So using the official ATC, you'll be able to check for saturation of your observation. And because it assumes a perfect subtraction, PSF subtraction, so basically there is no wavefront drift that is simulated, there is no error on the target acquisition, there is no jitter taken into account, the predicted contrast will be only photon noise limited, so it will be a very optimistic case. If you want to have a more realistic estimate of your contrast and to design your observation, you might want to use some advanced tools. So for NIRCam and MIRI, the Space Telescopes team developed the Pangaea chronography. So it's a Python engine that is able to choose different OPD map for the wavefront, different PSF spectral type, and so on. So it's much more complete. There's also another tool which is called PyNRC that was developed by Joran Lezering for NIRCam. It has the same capabilities. For NIRISS, the AMI, similarly, Alex Greenbaum developed and put it on GitHub several tools to simulate the AMI observations. And here at UDM, we developed a simulator with a pre-computed contrast curve for different exposure time, brightness, and filters. So check out those different websites for detailed simulations. The next step is to choose your PSF reference star. So if you want to minimize the slew time, you have to choose a nearby star to your target, so less than 10 degrees in the best case. Your PSF reference star must have the same spectral type or at least the same colors in your feature of interest. So this is very true for the NIRCam and the NIRISS filters, which are quite large. this is less critical for the MIRI coronagraphs. Obviously, the star has to be similar in brightness or slightly brighter because you want to stay in a similar regime on the detector. And finally, it has to be single with no disk, with no companions, so that you will not bias your subtraction. So basically, the PSF reference star must have been vetted from the ground by using pre-imaging from another observatory or interferometry and so on.
I have a question about this.
Sorry, what was the question?
Will there ever be a goal to build up a library of reference stars from all observations?
Yeah, so that is one important thing. So each PSF reference star for all the programs, GTO, GEO, and ERS program will become immediately public with the goal to build up a giant library of PSFs.
Okay, so it depends. So we may not need to use a reference star if there's already a good match in that library.
So this is not true for cycle 1 because obviously at cycle 1 there won't be any library. For the future cycles, it's not clear yet. It will depend on the diversity in the library, and I guess it would be recommended to obtain a PSF anyway, just for the purpose of building up the library.
Yeah. Okay.
So different tools to search for your star. Simbad, there is a typo here. Vizier or Searchcal for interferometric purpose. Last but not least, estimate your visibility. This is very true for if you want to use the bar on NIRCam on the 4-quadrant phase mask on MIRI. As Loic showed you right before, there is the chronographic target visibility tool dedicated to that. All right, and then the last step is to design the APT, which has the final say on your proposal. I think that's it for these strategies. Is there any question before moving on to the demo of the APT?
Question here, Julien, nice presentation. So question is, how much do you waste time or take time to rotate the telescope by 10 degrees?
So by default is 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Yeah. So the high contrast observation with James Webb are highly inefficient. I think the efficiency, the rate is about 20%, 30%. It's really expensive in terms of overheads. So basically, do not try to optimize the total time because by default it would be very inefficient. Just optimize your science.
Yeah, I would say that's the word. Yeah, I think the science dictates basically. They'll manage with the efficiency. You just go for the best science, and if it takes more time, so be it.
Other questions? All right, I get to know. So the science case here that we'll use to demonstrate the APT is a real science case that will be executed as part of the GTO program, I guess the MIRI GTO team. So it's to observe the GJ758b, which is a very cool burn dwarf. And we slightly modify the science case to include some AMI observation with the goal to probe the closest separation to search for additional companions here. So we'll use the F430 medium feature with the ANIMO to search for inner companions, and we'll use the MIRI, the 4-quadrant phase mask to sample the SCD of the companion in the 3 different features to search for ammonia in the atmosphere of the companion. So I won't go to the EDC for the target arc or to check for saturation because it's quite straightforward. And if you want to learn how to do that, I invite you to check the webinar dedicated to imaging, as this is very similar in terms of the design of the ETC. And I will go straight to the APT. So I've opened, so I will close it. Right. So this is the APT. All right, so let's start with the APT. So the first thing that I want to show is there is a possibility to load template for a proposal on APT using different instruments. So if you go to File, GEMSWeb Demonstration Proposal, there are several examples that you may want to use if you are a newcomer in the APT world. But here today we'll start from scratch. So I will create a new GEMSWeb proposal. And as we can see, we have the standard categories on the left to fill in. So and here the first page. So as usual, the title, the abstract should be provided, as well as the category and the PDF file of your proposal. But we will go directly to the targets. So we will add our two targets. So the first one is the science target. So we'll use the fixed target resolver to use a SIMBAD to search for GJ758. It's loaded, so I will expand this tab. So here we have our target. We have to fill in the category. So it's a G star. It's a G7 star. It has a bond dwarf as a companion. It is not extended. And since it's a nearby object, it is recommended, highly recommended, to provide the proper motion of the target. So from SIMBAD, I found that it's moving in right ascension by 82 mass per year, and in declination by 161 mass per year. It was taken in the 2000 epoch, and the parallax is 63 milli-arcsecond. All right, so now we have to add the PSF reference star. So using SIMBAD, I search for a nearby target, so nearby to GJ758, similar spectral time, so mid-G, similar brightness, so around 4 in K-band and in the WISE band as well. And actually there is a HD 190360. It's a G5. It's a 0.4 magnitude brighter, so it's okay. And it's a very good, so it's a single star. Actually, it has a non-companion, but it was found with a radial velocity, so it's very close in, it won't bias the observation. There is no binary companion at larger distance, so actually, or at least in the field of view of the different instrument. So it's a perfect reference star for our program. So I will load these targets. So this would be a calibration star using to calibrate the point spread function. So again, it's not extended, and we have to provide the proper motion. So using SIMBAD, it was 683 milli-arcsecond per year in right ascension and minus 525 in declination. And the parallax is very similar to GJ758. All right, so now we have our two targets. So the target star and the PSF reference star, so we can create our observation. So I will start with the NIRISS AMI mode. So I will create a specific folder for the AMI observation, and I will put an explicit name for the label. So as usual, it is recommended to be as explicit as you can for the label, just to help you figuring out what's going on your APT and to help the reviewer at the SCCI. So the first observation we'll create will be the science observation of GJ758 using the AMI mode. So we'll load the NIRISS and the AMI template. The target will be GJ758. So the target acquisition, so for AMI, it is recommended to achieve a signal-to-noise ratio of at least 300. So using the exposure time calculator, I found that using the AMI bright mode, because it's very bright, it's brighter than 6 magnitude, so we should use the AMI bright mode to perform the target acquisition. And we only need 7 groups to achieve the recommended signal-to-noise ratio. Now we can fill in the science observation with the NIRCam. So it is recommended to stare at the same position during the observation, and we will load the filter. So we will execute the observation in the F430 M filter using 300 groups, and let me check my notes. No, 7 groups, sorry, and 894, so actually it's 8 groups, sorry, and 894 groups. So using these configurations, so roughly 10 minutes, we'll be able to reach actually the contrast floor that is predicted by the different simulation. So this is okay. Now we can move on to the direct imaging parameters. So actually, if your target is faint enough, you'll be able to obtain a very brief snapshot of your target without the mask. So this is recommended for post-processing analysis, if it's possible. In our case, the JWST-8 is too bright for direct imaging, so we won't be able to obtain this observation. And finally, the PSF reference observation, we have to go back to this after, right after designing the observation for our PSF. So basically, I will create here in my folder a new line corresponding to the PSF reference observation with the AMI mode. So again, we'll use NIRISS, the AMI mode, but now we'll load the reference star. And actually the target act will be executed similarly because it has very similar brightness. So actually it's a bit brighter, so we obtain a higher SNR on this target. So we'll stare very similarly. We use the same subarray, and we'll add the F430 medium filter. And now we have to slightly modify the parameter settings. So because the target is 0.4 magnitude brighter, we want to obtain the same number of photons in total during our observation on both calibrator and a science target. So we have to compensate the total number of frames that we obtained on the science target, which was 8 groups times 894 frames in total, by the brightness ratio between the two targets, which is 0.4 magnitude, or roughly 0.68 in brightness ratio. Okay, so that is the total number of frames we want to obtain with the target reference, with the PSF reference star. But here, before saturation, we have to obtain, we can only get 4 groups before saturation. So basically we'll have to obtain 1,215 integration to reach the same number of photons. So using 4 groups now before saturation and 1215 integration, we'll obtain the same number of photons on the PSF reference star. Okay, so it's again too bright, so we won't be able to obtain a direct image. But this is now a PSF reference observation. So I will check this box. We have a reminder that the PSF will be automatically public to build in the library of reference star. So now we can go back to our science target and associate this PSF reference to our observation so that they are both linked as science and calibration for the pipeline. So the last step we have to do is to tell the APT that we want the observations to be executed back to back to benefit from the minimum time between the two wavefront state of the observatory. So we'll do that by going to the special requirement, and I will add a timing requirement to group the 2 observations into a single sequence non-interruptible. so that we see that the two observations will be executed back to back in a single visit. And actually that's it for the NIRISS AMI observations. So I will move on, create a new folder for the MIRI coronagraphic observation. So that will be the MIRI coronagraphic observation. So similarly, we will start with JJ758 coronagraphic in the first filter, so that is the F1065 observation. So instrument that will be MIRI in the coronagraphic mask. So the target is the science target. Target acquisition, so using the exposure time calculator, we check that the target is too bright, so we have to use the ND filter. The readout pattern, we don't have any option. Oh, actually, yes, we do, but the fast mode is recommended. And we need 45 groups to achieve the recommended signal-to-noise ratio. And we will do the target acquisition in the first quadrant. All right. So we can now move on to the science exposures. So we'll use the 4-quadrant phase mask in the first filter, so F1065C. The exposure time will be done in the fast mode, and using basically different simulation, we found that we can obtain a very high signal-to-noise ratio on our on JJ75B. Actually, if we use 300 groups and 8 integration. We want jitter, we don't want a second exposure, as Loïc explained during the presentation earlier. So that's it for the first filter. Now we have to create a second observation for the second filter. Okay, so that is for the first row, obviously. So we will repeat the exercise. Let me actually duplicate this. That will be the first word on our target in the second filter. So that is the F1140. First word, so same target acquisition, but we have to update here the mask and the filter. We'll use the same configuration to achieve the same signal-to-noise ratio. So that was for the first row. So now we want to continue to create the sequence. So after row 1, we'll create the same observation, but at the second row position. So there'll be row 2. That will be actually in the first filter. So that is JJ758 in the 1065 filter. So we have to update here again, the filter and the mask. We'll do again the same. I will duplicate this. We'll do the same in the second filter, so the 1140 at the second word position. So we will update here the filter. So now we have, as you can see on the left, row 1 our 2 filters, row 2 our 2 filters, and everything is correct. So the last thing now we have to do is to create the observation for the PSF reference star at a single row position. So that is the PSF reference in the first filter. So we use MIRI, the chronographic, the target that will be our reference. So similarly, same brightness. So we'll use the same configuration for the target ACK. That is the ND filter and using 45 groups in the first quadrant. So the chronographic observation would be done again, 4-quadrant phase mask in the F1065C filter using the fast mode. But here, because the companion is very close in, we are interested in the small grid jitter option to improve the library, to create a mini library, as I explained earlier today, to be able to reach a deeper contrast. And we'll use the 9-point small grid jitter. So now we have to adjust the groups and integration. So very similarly to what we did with the AMI observation, the target is brighter. So we want to obtain the same number of photons in total. So we have to compensate for that. So on our target, we obtained 300 groups times 8 integration. That we have to compensate for the brightness ratio between the two stars, so that is a factor of 0.68 or 3. And now, the maximum number of groups before saturation on that target was 205, as I checked with the exposure time calculator. So we can use, as you can see here, up to 8 integrations. But we might, just to remind you, we will do the small grid jitter using 9 points. So we don't have to obtain the same number of photons per integration. We can again compensate from the total jitter points. So that is divided by 9. So basically, we can obtain a single integration per jitter position to reach roughly the same number of photons. Actually, since we do the small grid jitter, the PSF won't be exactly the same, and the PCA combination of the different at the different position might not be what you expect in the end in terms of total number of photons. So maybe you want to compensate for that. So instead of 1 integration, we can simply take 2. So here it's up to you whether you want to obtain exactly the same number of photons or if you want to be a bit more conservative. That is up to you. So 2 integration, 1 integration per exposure, per jitter position. And this will be the PSF reference observation. So we can duplicate this, and for the second filter, so that will be the PSF reference observation in the F1140. And again, I will only update the filter here, and that would be a PSF reference observation. So now we have our sequence. So world 1, world 2, PSF in each filter. So we have now to provide a special requirement and links to tie together this strategy. So first we'll associate each science observation to a PSF. So first world would be the PSF in the 1065 filter. Second world would be the same PSF. First world in the second filter with the associated PSF, again for world 2. Now we have the linked for the PSF. So we want all the observation to be executed at a single visit, so all back to back. Similarly, we will add a special requirement in terms of timing to group the sequence together so that the observation will be executed back to back. So we will group the sequence as they are defined here, as they appear. So world 1 first filter, world 2 second filter, and then moving to the PSF. And this will be a non-interruptible sequence. So we have the first constraint, all the observation will be executed at a single visit. But now we want to add more constraint in terms of position angle because we want to provide a PA offset between the two rows. So similarly, we will add a position angle constraint in terms of offset. So between the two row position on the same filter, and we want the offset of the observatory to be between 11 and 12 degrees. So that is accessible as we checked with the CTUT tool, and it will provide us a window of about 10 days per year. So it's okay, it might be too tight for you, so you'll be able to, if you want, you can relax those constraints. All right, we will do the same exercise for the second filter. So we'll add a PA offset link between the two roll position and the same filters of the same amount. All right. And then the last thing we have to do is that we want the observatory to observe our star at a given position angle because we want the companion to be far from the edges of the mask, but also in the second quadrant to avoid the first quadrant in which we do the target acquisition. So here in the first observation, we will add a PA constraint in terms of range, and using the CTVT we saw with this constraint on the roll, and to put the companion in the second quadrant, we need to put the observatory to observe the star with a PA angle between 165 and 175 degrees. All right, so we have our three constraints. So single sequence for all our observation, or 112 PSF. We want a specific orient of the observatory to put the companion in the second quadrant. And lastly, we also want a PA offset between the two rolls for each filter. And that's it. So now we can calculate the schedulability of our observation by clicking on Smart Accounting. So this will optimize the sequence, the small angle maneuver, and so on, to minimize the overheads, but also to calculate the overheads and to calculate the schedulability of our program. So it takes time. All right, so we do see that the AMI sequence can be executed on a very large window, and we'll have probably a second visit for the MIRI observations, and the window is about, as you can see, 10 days, so July 2020, but our observations are schedulable. And if we go to the form editor, we see that the total science time on the target and the PSF reference would be about 1.4 hours, but including overheads will be up to 6 hours. So as we said before, it's a highly inefficient chronographic observation are usually very inefficient, but you have to deal with that. All right, so now we can provide the different information and we'll be able to submit the proposal. So we are now at the end of the webinar, so we'll provide the slides, but also the final version of the APT on our website. It was a pleasure to give you those webinars during the last month. So I'm sure you will come back to the videos when you start to prepare your program. And that's it. So don't hesitate if you have any question. Just go to JDocs first. It contains lots of information, but also there is our website and our help desk, so jameswebhelp@astro.umontreal.ca if you have any question. Just remind you the deadline for submitting the proposal is April 6th. And I thank you and wish you a good day. Bye.